You know, I think the unethical behavior, or the ethical behavior, I guess you would say, of legislators has been on both sides of the aisle, to your question, both Republicans and Democrats for years, and it's become a swamp. The only way to clean that up is real ethics reform, which we've stood for now for years, something I've been talking about now for years as well. The bigger problem for me that was this, is that my opponent has been talking about this for months, but then going back and taking money from the same people to which he's chiding this morning. You can't say one thing and then do another.
Thank you. Our next direct question to Mr. Quinn.
Mr. Quinn, recently, former President Bill Clinton took the unusual step of actively engaging in a campaign for a state-level office, recording a telephone message and sending emails endorsing your opponent. Considering President Clinton's popularity in Erie County, do you think this could tip what appears to be a very close race in your opponent's favor?
I hope not. No, I mean, you know, you see commercials, you have things in your mailbox, you have debates like this, which allow for us to talk about what the true issues are. The reason why we came up with this 5-point plan back in January, the reason why we've knocked on over 17,000 doors, and the reason why we continue to talk to people and have these debates is that I truly believe that people want solutions, real solutions. And whether I had someone call on a robocall next week or Tim has another person call, whatever it may be, those aren't solutions. They're simply politics again. And the commercials, people want solutions. They want to know there's opportunity in Western New York. They want to know there's going to be accountability in Albany. And to have both of those, Bill Clinton has nothing to do with either one of them. To get both of them, you need a plan. A plan that brings about solutions for the families of Western New York, which is why I believe our 5-point plan of bold new ideas are the solutions that people are looking for.
Thank you. Your rebuttal, Mr. Kennedy?
I was very proud to have the endorsement of former President Bill Clinton. You know, former President Bill Clinton knows about job creation because as president he oversaw the greatest economic boom in our nation's history. And former President Bill Clinton understands that I have what it takes to go to Albany and stand up and fight for the people of Western New York and New York State to make the changes that are necessary to move New York State and Western New York in a new direction. And it starts with job creation. So I was very proud to have the endorsement of former President Bill Clinton.
Before I ask our next direct question from the panel, job creation is coming up a lot in this debate. And of course, everybody supports that. Nobody opposes creating jobs. But we're being very general in our responses. Mr. Kennedy, each candidate will have 1 minute to respond, no rebuttal. Mr. Kennedy, exactly how are you going to create jobs?
I'm going to create jobs the same way that I have as Chairman of Economic Development in the Erie County Legislature. I've worked directly with businesses like Dave Sullivan from Industrial Support Incorporated that President Obama recently came and visited. I worked directly with Dave Sullivan, walked him in a hands-on approach through the government bureaucracy as Chairman of Economic Development to cut through the red tape to help incentivize his business in a high-tax economy to grow jobs in his business. Dave Sullivan is one of my biggest supporters because he knows firsthand my ability to work with businesses to grow jobs. I've created jobs by spurring economic development projects like a multi-million-dollar South Park Avenue revitalization project in the city of Buffalo, multi-million-dollar drainage reconstruction project in the heart of Cheektowaga, Como Park Boulevard reconstruction project in Cheektowaga, School 84 reconstruction. These are jobs, construction jobs. These are quality of life improvements. School 84 reconstruction that under my incumbent opponent's watch was left out of the school multi-million, billion-dollar reconstruction project was left out for the most impaired, disabled children in all of Western New York, and I spearheaded the reconstruction of that school.
Thank you. Mr. Quinn, how would you create jobs?
First and foremost, you need a moratorium on all new taxes, fees, and regulations. It's the only way to create an environment where people want to be here, they want to retain jobs, they want to spread growth, and the growth of this economy and the growth of Western New York is going to happen in the private sector. Second of all, I think you have to work at our infrastructure, and to do so, you need a 5-year capital program, so that architects and builders and construction people can tell not only what we're going to build this year, but 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line. And second of all, like we said earlier, there is no silver bullet. Therefore, we should work on the industries that work well. Use our natural resources like Lake Erie, the Outer Harbor. Look into higher education and what we've been able to do. There's 22 higher education institutions here locally in Western New York that put $3.2 million back into the economy every single year. Ensuring the fact that we work with them and to build off them is extremely important. And I think even more importantly is to look to the medical corridor. We should do what states like Minnesota and Ohio are doing. providing angel tax credits and R&D tax credits to ensure that we have investors that want to come here to this area to grow areas that we've already started to grow in.
Thank you. Our next direct question to Mr. Kennedy.
Mr. Kennedy, the most recent polls indicate that your opponent has a narrow lead in this contest, in spite of the fact that this is a heavily gerrymandered Democratic district that clearly favors your party. Why do you believe this race is so tight when your party has controlled this seat for decades?
Well, I can tell you this, that the statistical dead heat that poll showed was an improvement from the numbers that were previously showed, and it's because people are recognizing that my message is their message. My message is one of change, opportunity, optimism, and hope for the people of Western New York. My message is one of job creation, cutting taxes, and cutting the most dysfunctional state government in the entire nation, and changing the ethics of the state government that's become the worst in the nation, that my Albany incumbent opponent has been a part of. Now, my opponent may have name recognition, but we have the people's message of change and opportunity. And we're going to go down to Albany, and we're going to take the people's message with us. And again, the only way we're going to change Albany is by changing the people that we send there. And my opponent may have the power of incumbency, and he may have the money, but we have the message, and we have the people, and that's why I believe we're going to be successful, and that's why, as New York State Senator, I'm going to stand up and fight for the people of Western New York.
Mr. Quinn, your rebuttal.
You know, we've come forth, as I said earlier, with solutions and looking out for the taxpayers of Western New York. At the end of the day, though, the only poll that counts is on Election Day. None of us put too much faith in these polls, to be honest with you. No matter what happens on November 2nd, it's going to be the people who come out to vote. And I believe, as I always have, that we have the solutions that people are looking for. The solutions that Western New Yorkers want about growing business, about growing the economy, about providing opportunity for the people of Western New York, and accountability to Albany.
Thank you. Our next direct question to Mr. Quinn.
Mr. Quinn, New York is currently suffering a budget crisis of unprecedented proportions. Yet a significant part of your 5-point plan calls for broad tax cuts and credits aimed at businesses while excluding the private citizen. How do you expect to reduce New York's vast budget deficit by cutting taxes?
In order to create the jobs, as we said, and have these incentives, the incentives are there obviously for job creation. On the flip side of the ledger, though, which I think oftentimes you don't hear about, you hear politicians talk about this tax cut and that tax cut and this tax cut. You need the flip side of it, which is the actual spending cuts. So the reason why we provided $8.1 billion in spending cuts is I believe the fact that if you can balance on one ledger, the incentives and tax credits and other incentives to bring businesses here, with the $8.1 billion in the hole that we have next year, you'll be able to create more wealth through job creation. So the two of them even out and doing it together. You need to fill that hole, and the 8.1 can also be used to fill the tax cuts are there. But you simply can't come up here, or any debate, or any commercial, and say, look, we're going to give cuts and then not tell where. We're going to cut spending and then not tell where. The reason why we have an $8.1 billion spending cut plan is the fact that we need to come up with $8.1 billion next year. There's no way around it. You either cut, you borrow, or you increase taxes and fees. Last 2 years, we've increased taxes and fees by $14 billion. And as someone in the minority, we fought day and night to ensure the fact that it would not happen. But people like John Sampson and Shelley Silver, they don't want to cut. They're not able to cut. So on one hand, while you have the incentives to bring about jobs, you need to have on the other end of the ledger the cuts to make up for it.
Thank you. Your rebuttal, Mr. Kennedy.
Jack, I ask you again, where has your plan been for the last 6 years? All of a sudden, in an election year, this is what Albany politicians do. Albany politicians like Jack Quinn III make promises in an election year, but when they go down to Albany, where he's been for the last 6 years, they fail to implement those promises they make during the campaign. The fact of the matter is, what we need to do is we need to make serious reforms in New York State government. It starts by implementing a property tax cap, alleviating the highest property tax burden in the entire nation throughout New York State.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. At this point, we're going to give each candidate 2 minutes for closing statements. We'll begin with Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you very much. What an honor it is to be here with all of you today, and I sincerely mean that. You've heard a lot today, but I can tell you this. No one is going to do what is necessary down in Albany like I am, to stand up and fight for the people of Western New York. I have a history of taking on the party bosses. I have a history of standing up against the status quo. I have a history of standing up and doing what's right for the community that I represent. And I'm going to do the same thing when I get to the New York State Senate. I'm going to stand up and fight the downstate interests that for far too long have dictated what's been happening here in Western New York under the watch of my incumbent opponent, Jack Quinn III. I'm looking forward to going down to Albany and standing up for all of you, taking the people's message of change and hope down to Albany and doing what's right, creating jobs in this community, fighting the taxes in this community and across New York State, taking on the most dysfunctional state legislature in the entire nation. That's the people's message. I'm an occupational therapist from the private sector. I had an incredible education here. I went on and got my master's degree at Duval College in occupational therapy. My wife and I are raising 2 young children, a 5-year-old son and a 2-year-old daughter. I want them to have opportunities like all of you in this community that our generation hasn't had in this community because jobs and opportunity have left. Because Albany, my opponent, Albany incumbent Jack Quinn III has been a part of this dysfunctional legislature and has failed to deliver results. When I'm New York State Senator, I am going to create jobs in this community and work with the businesses in this community like I already have. I'm looking forward to the opportunity to go down there. Thank you, all of you, for putting this on today. Mr. Lina, Mr. Scott, thank you for the opportunity to hear the issues and to see who is the difference maker when it comes to the New York State Senate and when it comes to standing up for Western New York. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Quinn, you have 2 minutes for your closing remarks.
I appreciate the honor to be here, and believe me, it truly was an honor. It's good to know that this is a debate that's been going on for years here, and you've had the most important races in the county here at St. Joe's. So it's an honor for me to be here and be part of this tradition at this fine academic institution. As someone who's been in the minority for a little bit over 5.5 years, we have fought day and night for the taxpayers of Western New York. We voted against $20 billion in new taxes and fees and regulations and voted for over $7.5 billion in tax cuts. We fought for Medicaid reform, forming the first ever Medicaid task force on fraud and efficiencies. Formed a working group that traveled statewide that looked at trying to provide opportunities and jobs for young professionals both here in Western New York and throughout the whole entire state. We fought for ethics reform and pension modernization. And throughout those 5 years, that brought about this 5-point plan in January, before I had even thought about running for the state senate. And that 5-point plan talks about cutting state spending, putting a moratorium on the taxes and regulations, because that's what I believe is the only way that we can bring about economic prosperity and opportunity to the people in this room and the families of Western New York. Job creation, good job creation. There is no silver bullet, but we can do through incentivizing and ensuring the fact that good business comes here, create jobs for all of you in this room going forward. Medicaid reform. You can't spend $54 billion a year on Medicaid over and over again. $15.5 billion in optional services. It's unsustainable. It is simply unsustainable. We have to switch and change that program. Ethics reform. Albany is a swamp. People on both sides of the aisle being indicted now for years, going to jail. The only way you're going to regain the public's trust is by cleaning up the state capitol. And pension modernization. When you take our state debt load of $64 billion a year, Medicaid at $54 billion a year, and pensions at $7 billion a year, each family in this area is paying $6,000 a year to pay for this.
Thank you, Mr. Quinn. At this time, I'd like to invite our student council president to give the candidates a small token of our appreciation.
On behalf of the St. Joe's community, we would like to thank Mr. Kennedy and Mr. Quinn for their time here with us today. As a token of our gratitude, we would like to present you with these grab bags of St. Joe's items. Thank you, good luck, and God bless.